My name is Dr. ET, and ET stands for Edith Trevino. Thank you for having me, Mr. Vergara.
Oh, thank you so much. And now there's, like I said, I looked through all of your stuff, and there's so much we could talk about. But I do want to start. You grew up in Mexico, correct?
Yes, yes.
And I want to start there. I read a portion where you had to, cross over, come to school, and I'm figuring San Diego, and then go back. So tell us that part. Can we start there?
Yes, yes. So I was born in Ciudad Acuña, Coahuila, which is the border with Del Rio, Texas.
Oh,
And so we
Texas.
live,
Okay.
yes, in Del Rio, Texas. But it's kind of like you guys, you have a border too. And so
Hmm.
we would wake up real early in the morning, like at 5 in the morning, and then to make it across town to Del Rio to be in school by 8. And we did that maybe up until I was in second grade, when we learned that we couldn't do that because we had to live in the United States to go to school there. But for the longest time, I was what we call a transnational student, a student that travels to school daily back and forth.
Hmm.
And then after maybe third, fourth grade, we would stay there during the week. Um, no, it wasn't until middle school, actually. No, not third grade. We would stay Monday through Friday, and then Friday we'd go back to Mexico, and then come back Sunday night for years and
Wow.
years and years.
Wow. And so learning English, how was that? How was learning English traveling from, from one side to the other?
Well, I think for me, now that I look at it in the perspective of being a language expert, that I learned English because I already knew Spanish, right? But even though to me at the beginning it was hard, like I remember being in a competition for Taekwondo. I don't know why my mom put us in Taekwondo, and it was first grade, and I didn't know any English, and so I remember we were there, ha ha ha, and whatever I would do, the man would yell at me in English, and I was like, I don't know what he's saying, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I remember going to school, and I remember not knowing any English, but my teachers were, I mean, I don't have any bad memories in my early grades. I just do remember my teacher making connections with words and pictures, and that really helped me.
Hmm.
Um, but I think more than the language for me, it was the culture shock, because even though we were all Mexican, because in the on the border you have a lot of Hispanics, they were still very different than me. They were
Yeah.
Mexican American, and I was Mexican Mexican, right? And so
Yeah.
a lot of the culture was different, the way they were brought up, the things. It was just that was hard for me.
Let's go into that. Mexican, and Mexican American. What some people might not know the difference. When you say Mexican, what does that mean?
To me, Mexican Mexican is, you just get it. Like, you get the language, you get the culture. You can say a word and it's funny because we understand it. We're very immersed in the culture, in the way that you're supposed to say usted instead of tú. Just little things that have to do
Hmm.
with how we were grown up, right? And in the Mexican culture, the way we were very raised was kind of like a lot of respect, things like that. And then the Mexican American, it was more freedom. It was more freedom. They were talkative, and they were like brave, and you know that was different to me. Even now, like, it's taken me forever to be able to call somebody by their first name that I respect, because in Mexico we were raised, you don't call anybody by their first name. That's
Yeah.
disrespectful. So just little things like that, you know
Were
is what I remember.
were you treated differently from the Mexican American kids? Like, did the Mexican American kids treat you differently?
Yes, and it's so funny that you asked, because I have this narrative that sometimes I present about. I was placed in a GT classroom. I'll never forget. It was fifth grade. I didn't know it was GT classroom, but I was placed in a classroom, and I despised it. I was like, oh, this classroom. And the kids were Mexican American, but they were fancy. Like, they were wearing nice clothes. They
Yeah.
would laugh. They would giggle. They were very confident, and I was so quiet. I was just like super quiet. And then eventually 2 weeks later, they put me back in my class. And I was so excited because in my class, my teacher spoke Spanish, everybody spoke Spanish. It was like I was back in my element. It wasn't until I was in high school that I became really good friends best friends with some of the people in that class. And I said, hey, that class that we were in with Mr. Calderon in fifth grade, what class was that? And they were like, yes, we remember you. Why did you leave? I said, I don't know. I was always curious. And back then, if you remember, nobody would call the parents. It's like, we are going to do
Yeah.
this and this is how it's going to be. And so my friends were like, that was a GT class. And I was like, oh my God, I was kicked out of GT, right? So looking back, I think, what could the teacher have done? He could have put me in a group, but no, I was like isolated looking at everybody. And, the worst way to feel, which I don't, that is when when you feel out of place, when you feel like
Mhm.
this is not my people, this is not my tribe, nobody's even talking to me. And then as a 10-year-old kid, I did not like it at all. But I never told anybody. I never told my mom. Sino que one day they just took me back to class, to my other class,
Yeah.
which I loved. Mhm.
Yeah. And so you went through elementary school, middle school, like that, and then you get to high school. In high school, are you still going back and forth?
Not as much, but kind of yes, but not as much
Mm,
because by then we already had a residence. We lived there.
yeah.
But it was still very much we were on our own, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. And were you a good student in high school?
I don't think so. Well, here's the
No.
thing. I don't think I was a good student because nobody ever told me, ever, as a child, you are smart, you can do
Mm,
anything you want. None of that.
mm,
Okay. And so my parents, their goal for me was to learn English. That was their goal. Que aprendas inglés. Well,
yeah.
guess what, Mr. Vergara? I learned English in second grade. So my goal was met. I didn't have any more goals.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I failed high school because of a situation with a teacher that one of my favorite teachers said, you have so much potential. You're so smart. And I was like, Miss Nichols, why are you telling me this? It's over. Like, she's like, no, it's not over. There's life after high school. And it was her saying those things to me that I was like, you know what? I'm gonna figure it out. And nobody went to my graduation because it was in the summer.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad saying, Papi, ¿no vas a ir a mi graduación? And he says, no, esa graduación no cuenta, which means no,
Uh,
that graduation
yeah.
doesn't count.
Hmm.
So I joined the army, and what would keep me going was Miss Nichols. Miss Nichols said that I could do it. And it was at that moment, believe it or not, because I always wanted to be a police officer. I know it's crazy. I always wanted to be a police officer, right? Which
Yeah.
is why I was in the army. But one thing I realized is I don't want kids to fall through the cracks the way I did. And my life turned out well. I mean, there was a lot of struggle, but there didn't have to be that much struggle. I have friends that I graduated with, dear friends that I love and admire. They went to Harvard. They went to Yale. You know,
Wow.
they went to all the Ivy League schools, and I was like, oh my gosh, right? But you know, so yeah.
Do you think it's a cultural thing where Hispanic parents, Latino parents don't praise their kids? Like they don't like, for instance, when I was raised, right? Like I told you earlier, like I feel like my parents were more American. I'm Mexican, but my parents were raised more American, and so, they were more. I feel like they're more loving. Like they would say stuff like "I love you." They would say "I love you," right? But then I got married, and my wife is Mexican, and her parents are. She's first generation Mexican. Her parents would never say "I love you." Her parents would never show emotion. Her parents would never like it wasn't about, it wasn't that. It wasn't like the way that I was shown, it was different. It was a whole different thing. And I had never seen that before because like I said, I was in this weird little bubble. I was in this weird little bubble. And so I get out and I see like, my wife and her family go to parties. We see, how things are, how it is. And yeah, there's a lot of respect. There's a lot of respect, but I never heard her parents say "I love you." Really, it's rare. It's a rare thing.
Well, for me, I really never heard it from my mom because she had a real tough childhood, but so did my dad. But my
Yeah.
dad was very loving. My dad was very, very loving. He's in heaven already, but um, they do tend to be what's the word that I'm looking for? Stricter in the sense of don't be crying, get over it,
Yeah,
move on, stop being dramatic or things like that. So, but as far as loving, my dad was real loving.
that's
My
good.
mom was not. Yeah, my mom was not.
Yeah, and so you never heard those encouraging words from your family, like, "Hey, you could do it," or whatever. I never heard those encouraging words. It was just like my goal was, you need to finish high school because we didn't finish high school. We didn't finish high school, so you have to be the one that finishes high school, and then that was it. If I did that one thing, then I had reached the pinnacle of all things
Yes,
in life. That was it. And so I graduate high school. I barely graduate high school, but I graduate high school, and now it's like, now what? Now what
exactly.
do I
So
do?
that was me learning English. And my parents did tell me, like they would tell me, and it's a Spanish word, and I know in other countries it's a really bad word, but it's like the chingona, like they would say,
Hmm.
eres chingona,
Yeah,
which means you're fierce and all that. But that didn't come until I was older, until I became like a young woman, that they would see that I would work hard or whatever. But yeah, when I was little, it's just learning English for my parents was such a big deal. It was like you made it, you learned English, but that
yeah,
was all I had.
yeah. And so Miss Nichols inspires you, and you join the army. Why do you join the army? Is it just because you want to be a police officer? Like,
Well, you see, because I was an immigrant, I never wanted anybody to come and tell me, "Oh, you were here and you took and you came to our country," and I always like to pay back, right, the favor or
mhm,
whatever. And so I was like, I'm going to join the army, so nobody can ever tell me anything about, "Oh, you're an immigrant and you came here or whatever." Well, yes, I did, and I joined the army and I paid my service. Did you? I mean, I was already thinking like
yeah,
that, right? Um, and then also, I joined the army because I wanted it to give me structure. Like whatever I missed out on at school, whatever I didn't get, maybe the army could give it to me. And I was still an immigrant when I joined the army. I was not a citizen. I became a citizen after
mm,
joining the army. So to me, the army changed my life. I mean, it was in the army that I recognized, I really want to go to school, and I didn't think that I could. It was like you're going to school, but you don't think you're gonna ever make it.
mhm,
Um, so yeah, and the only reason I have my doctorate is because I owed myself a graduation. That's really how I saw it. I never got to walk on the, which is another crazy thing. Like in Mexico, you don't graduate in a field with grass, like in a football stadium. That's crazy. So
mhm.
I never had that opportunity, right? And so I was like, I'm gonna get my doctorate, and then that's gonna be my graduation. So
So you went to the army. You got your bachelor's. You got your doctorate degree. And so you got your doctorate in what?
in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on bilingual studies.
Awesome. And so you get this doctorate. Are you teaching yet? Are you in education yet? What are you
Yeah, well,
What are you doing?
I taught for 20 years. I
So you're teaching. As you're getting your doctorate.
I'm teaching. I'm a wife, a mom. I have two jobs because as teachers we always had two jobs, and I had to get that doctorate because I owed myself a graduation, and because representation matters. Sometimes they see us and they see us like less than, and I was like, no, I'm gonna make it because maybe with that little doctorate in front of my name, because as a teacher, I also experienced a lot of injustices, that I was like, okay, well, maybe I have a doctorate in front of my name. Um, I'll get some kind of respect because sometimes in the education world, because you're a woman, a person of color, whatever, people treat us different. And so
Yeah.
I was just trying to do as much as I can to represent my people and to give myself back what wasn't given to me as a
Yeah.
student.
Do you think us Latinos, we always have that chip on our shoulder where we don't feel like we're good enough? Because
Well,
I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I feel like I need to prove something. I feel like I need to prove something. Like for my people and just for my family. Like I feel like this pressure. Like I always got to prove something. I have three master's degrees. I got three master's degrees. I went to school. I got three master's degrees, and it's funny when and this I don't know when people talk like when they're talking about their degrees or whatever and they're saying certain things like, oh, I got my master's degree, and I'm just this was young me, sometimes I'm waiting to come around and they're gonna ask me, Mr. Vergara, what school did you go to? And I would say something like, oh, school. You mean schools, right? Like, what schools did I get my math? Multiple schools. Here's what it is. And I always feel like I had to, like I'm brown. I got a bald head. I have tattoos, right? Uh, and I felt like I had to prove something. Like I just had to prove that you know what, I'm good. I'm worthy. I'm smart. I could be successful. And so I feel like, I don't know, that's some chip on the shoulder that maybe us, I don't know.
Well,
I have it.
something that I've shared with my kids is this, and it's kind of like what you're saying, but I guess I look at it a little different. That I say, in order for us, we have to be 2 times better or 3 times better just to be equal.
Hmm.
That's how I see it. Now, one thing I absolutely love to do, before I used to get my feelings hurt, not anymore, I think now it's a compliment, is when people don't believe that I have a degree. I love to shock people. And I get that all the time from all kinds of people. But I think, to me, I'm done proving it. I think I had to prove it to myself more than I had to prove it to anybody else. And that's like my little internal power, right? And but yeah, I think that chip comes on, like I have to be worthy, because I don't have those other, what's the word, the privileges, right? So I have to climb up here, bust my tail 20 times just to get to somebody else that's just chilling out, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I have a son at West Point, and he's graduating already. And we
Awesome.
we have those conversations. When he left, I told him, "You're going to be in for a rude awakening, because, sometimes people are going to look at you and they're going to be like, well, how did he get here? Because that happens too, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't get upset. You just do your work and you answer, and then they're like, what? What? That's right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the my favorite part of being Mexican, is shocking people.
That's awesome. Back to that same point, like I want the students that I work with to think, what, it's possible to be assistant principal. It's possible to be an educator. If Mr. Vergara did it, and with his bald head and his tattoos, and he's here, and he's leading the way, and he has a kind heart, and he has a loving heart, and he's respectful, and he's smart, and he's running the school right here. If he could do it, then we could do it. So for me, it's about that as well.
It's that representation matters. That podcast you had earlier with
Yeah.
the teachers of color and all that.
Yeah.
Representation
Yeah,
matters,
Mr.
because
Pierre.
do I ever remember seeing teachers, principals that look like me, or assistant principals, or even higher up people? No. Now,
Mhm.
now I'm going to say this very carefully. Well, not very carefully, because that's not the right word, but, like, for example, my family, we have a janitorial company. So I have cleaned toilets. I have done all those things. Okay. But many people see us only doing those things, only doing the janitorial, only doing the wiping tables, only doing the this and that. And yes, we can do those things. We can do those things real well.
Mhm.
But we can also teach, and we can also lead, and we can also perform surgeries, and we can also, and so, to me, representation is so huge. Like, I was at a conference a while back. 99.9% of the people in attendance were people of color. And the keynote was not. You see, it's like, so our people are not good enough to be on that stage. Like, you're talking to us. Like, how, you see, so to me, I'm always talking about representation matters, because there's a lot of students who have had a tough childhood that go to your school. And then when they see you, they're like, exactly what you're saying. That could be me. Like, if the sir made it, I can make it, you
Yeah.
know, because the sir looks like me or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so that is such a big deal, and that's one of the reasons I really appreciated being able to be on your podcast, because I know you're about that, and you're
Mhm.
not you're not just talking about it, you're doing it. Because a lot of people
Mhm.
talk blah blah blah, and then they don't do it. They're not
Mhm.
about it. They're just about the talk. Oh yes, yes, do this. Oh yes. Well, are you doing it? No, they're not.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And so you're in the classroom. You're in the classroom for 20 years. You said 20 years. How did you stay in for so long? 20 years is a long time. And you think about today, right? Today teachers are going through things where they're like, I don't want to be in education anymore. I want to leave education. And a lot of it has to do with the way that they interact with students. They think that this the behavior is so terrible, and so now they're leaving the classroom because the behavior is out of control. How did you build relationships with the students that you work with that made you last for 20 years?
Well, here's the thing, and I'm sure you can relate. I usually always had the worst students.
Hmm.
I call us the toughest. Other people say you have the worst ones. And one thing I'll never forget, I had this one student in fifth grade, very tough kid. His family that had all been in prison and this and that. But when he was with me, he was a different kid, right? And even the way that I would get after him, I would be like, let's take it outside. Let's have a conversation outside, because some kids are about the respect, even though they're not being respectful. And I would take him outside and we'd have a conversation. He'd come back, be perfect. And I remember teachers would tell me, hey, what do you do with so and so that he behaves so well? Do you give him candies or what? I was like, no, I just treat him with like a human being, right? They
Hmm.
couldn't understand. But as a teacher, I will tell you that there were times that I was like exhausted, because
Oh
why am
yeah.
I getting the tough kids? Why am I getting all the tough kids, you guys? And over there, the other people, they have like all the kids that, oh, they're like perfect, they don't have behavior problems or whatever. And I would get the kids that were lighting up the trash can on fire,
Hmm.
and they would say, well, because you're the only one that understands. And so it got to the point that instead of getting mad at the system, I took it as a compliment, because I can handle any student.
Yeah.
But not everybody can do that. And it's very easy for people to just, oh, get them out of here, kick them out of here. But um, my doctoral research was on teacher perceptions of Mexican immigrant kids, students, lived experience with border violence.
Wow.
And what I found, and horrendous stories, right, that you can just imagine. What I found is that the most successful teachers were the ones that actually got to know their students. And the ones that had the worst were the ones that they were like, I don't care. It's not my job to get to know them. My job is to teach. Well,
Hmm.
those kids were falling through the cracks like crazy. But imagine as a teacher, if you have this kid, and this is a true story, you find out they're a troubled kid in your school, they're causing problems or whatever, and you find out their whole family, their entire family was unalived in front of them. And
Wow.
they had to be brought to the United States, right, for safety. So that changes your whole paradigm. Like, can you
Wow.
imagine as a kid, like, oh my God, am I next? And so once teachers found out, they were like, oh, okay, now let me work with this kid, right? Let me work with this student. So I always tell people, when there's a situation with a student, there's something going on. It's not just going to be, there's something that is going on with students.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I always had the tough kids. I remember
Yeah.
that.
There's always some sort of trauma. There's always a reason for the behavior, I feel, right? Whatever it may be, there's always something causing the student to act this way. And you for me, it's always about trying to figure these students out. All right, let me try to figure this out. And I always talk about this. I always talk about, like, the number one thing is safety. Like, you got to keep a safe classroom, right? You got to keep a safe classroom. You got to make sure you have rules and procedures. You got to make sure that the children feel physically safe in the classroom. They could speak and feel that they could say their opinion without being attacked. They just got to feel safe in your classroom. And then that sends a message of love, right? Because you always keep the things that you love safe. So they're like, man, Mr. loves me or Miss loves me because he's always looking out for making sure I'm okay. And you start the next level of love. And I always talk about, it's always about the biblical type of love. Like, you have to be patient. Love is patient. Be patient with your kids. Love is kind. Be kind with your kids. Love doesn't hold a grudge. You can't be holding grudges with these guys, right? You got to forgive them, right? It's a new day, and you just demonstrate love. You do those things, the next step is just to build them up. You start to build them up. You encourage them, like, hey, good job, way to go, that's a good, hey, you're increasing your math scores, your English is your sounds better, right? Something, you're just building them up. This is a universal thing. This is not black, this is not Mexican, this is not white. This is a universal thing, that if you just did these things, you would be running a smooth classroom.
And so,
And
yeah,
yeah,
and sometimes when teachers are horrifically mean to kids, I just think to myself, go work at the prison. Like, like you have to genuinely care about kids. Yeah,
yeah,
they misbehave because we've all had the tough classes where you're like, oh my God, how am I going to make it today? But that's what we're in for. And on tough days, you know what I would think about? I would think about how I would feel when I was going to college to become a teacher. I was just so crazy to get a teaching job, and so that would take me
yeah,
back. Oh, yeah, I remember my why. Why am I here? Right?
yeah,
Why am I doing the work? Um, and so that's why kids will perform for you. They will do anything for you
yeah.
if
If you
they know
show
that
them,
you care.
that's right, that's right. If you know them, if you know that if they feel that you care for them, then they would do whatever. I had an incident today. It was an after school program, and this little boy, he was gonna get suspended. He's gonna get suspended from the after school program for like a 3-day suspension. And I'm in the office with the principal, and they bring the little boy inside the office, and we're just he's talking. He's a very smart boy, talking to us about the whole situation, and you know. I'm talking to him, and then I start to. He's like, everybody doesn't like me. Everybody's mad at me. Nobody likes me. I was like, I said, I like you. I like you, and I could see the good in you. I could see that you're a smart boy, that you're a good boy, that you're kind, that I could see that in you. Maybe other people don't see it. They might say that, oh, this boy is always angry. Oh, this boy is always yelling at other. I go, I know you do those things. I go, but that's not what I focus on. I focus on the good in you, and you're a good kid. And then this kid gets up out of his seat and he gives me a hug, and I'm like, you're gonna make me cry, man. I'm looking around. I tell the kid, I'm like, you're gonna make me cry, man. And he sits down. He's like, oh, thank you, mister. Thank you. And he sits back down. But just pointing out, like, hey, you are a good kid, and I know that you're a good kid. And yeah, we all get angry. Yeah, we get upset. But I see good in you, and that's what I want to focus on. You do something like that, you pierce the heart like that, man, that you could change a life, just like the teacher changed your life, just
And
like the teacher
because
changed your life.
if you think about it, for me, I always like to focus on the kids that feel invisible. Nobody's ever told this kid how amazing. I had a coach share with me that he had given this kid a jersey, a number one jersey. Anyways, he had to get a number two or whatever. But and it's like, Coach, why are you giving me this jersey? And he said, because you have such potential. I see you working out and whatever. And he said the student started crying. So the coach is like, what did I do? And so eventually another coach went and asked the kid, hey, why are you crying, when the coach was telling you all these things? And the kid was like, nobody had ever told me that before.
Yeah.
How many kids do we see? Like, we as parents, we say that to our kids, right? Maybe because it
Hmm.
wasn't said to us or whatever. Our kids have heard it enough. You're the best. You're awesome. You're
Yeah.
smart. You're this and that. How many kids have never heard that from
Yeah.
anybody? And so when you tell them, they're like, oh my, it changes you. Like, yeah, it took Miss Nichols to say you're smart. I'm like, what? I am.
Yeah.
And when I do this all the time, when I speak and present to bilingual kids, and I say to them, boys and girls, did you know you have bilingual superpowers and that your brain is wired different and that you're super smart because you're bilingual? You should see their faces. It's like if you told them a big secret and they look at each other like what? Like in shock. Yeah, nobody's ever told them.
Yeah.
Ever. And so that's why I love the work that you do, because um how many of our students fall through the cracks?
A
Especially
lot.
middle school and high school, because elementary we give them a lot of love, and but um they just fall through the cracks. And it breaks my heart to see that. And so we have to become advocates. Another way that students see that you love them is when they see you advocating for them. Wow, someone cares for me.
Hmm.
um they're actually asking, how come I wasn't chosen? Or Why is the deadline closed, or just anything like that,
Hmm.
you know, that I can remember from being a teacher, things that we did. We have to become advocates. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then so you finish your career with as a teacher, and then what's the next step after that?
So, I mean, after I became a teacher, then became a dean, and I was a director, and then I became a district specialist. I started studying technology before COVID happened, so that was really cool. And then I started working at the region level of Texas. Texas has 20 regions,
Hmm.
and they're broken down by areas in the state. So I was at Region 1. And then that's when I decided to branch out on my own so that I could create and offer the best professional development. Because as a teacher, I remember going to PD and be so bored. I would like work on my checkbook, or I would
Yep.
do this, or sometimes I would get really offended. I would be like, "What? They brought me for this? I could have been in my classroom." And so I'm very intentional when I create PD for teachers and students and parents and all that, because it has to be the best. It has to be the best because I don't want to waste anybody's time. But it comes again. This is one thing that I've learned. Okay, and I'm sure you can agree. We become what we always wanted. We become what we needed, right? And so when I'm presenting and I'm doing my work, I'm thinking of myself. Okay, I'm sitting right there 20 years ago. Am I liking it? Is this, or is this just a boring PowerPoint from 20 years ago that nobody's updated?
Yeah.
Is it something that I heard last year? Or is it something that I'm going to feel inspired? And the happy moments for me are when people pull me aside secretly and they're like, I used to think very different, but now I feel so bad. Like I'm going to go and I'm going to change things, because we have to, right? We have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
And you give PDs to teachers, parents, and students, correct?
Yes. Yes. So I'm like yes, I do PD, professional learning, and sometimes it's a lot of work, because it's not normal. I mean, well, I was never a normal teacher. I was never traditional. I was like non-traditional.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I do my professional learning. But more than anything, it goes back to what you're saying. Everything has to be about caring. It has to go, or caring is the heart, right? And from the heart, you can do so much.
Hmm. And so
Mhm.
I've seen some of your TikToks where the kids look so happy. Like it looks like a celebration. Like I'm watching your little and I'm like, these kids are so happy. Like they're happy, and it looks like everybody's vibing, and it looks like it's an exciting time. Can you share a little bit about what you do with the kids, like when you're
Well, and sometimes the kids are tough. Sometimes, we went to a school 2 weeks ago and the kids were tough. They were tough. And by tough, I mean behavior and this and that. And
Yeah.
we just go in there strong, strict at the beginning. And then we slowly,
Okay, can you
um,
start
eh,
with what is it about? What exactly are you teaching the kids?
okay, so we teach them whatever it is that the district wants of us. But usually when we support kids, it's leadership,
Hmm.
social emotional goals, empowerment, how to make good choices, and how to be good leaders, how to advocate for themselves and ask questions instead of just taking no for an answer.
Hmm.
And so we do that, and depending on the grade level, it's different activities, right? And maybe it's a full day, maybe it's a half day. Sometimes it's newcomer camps, where we have students from different countries that just arrived and they're like, what's going on? And then sometimes it's just regular students that are monolingual, bilingual, just on how to make good choices in life, basically.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks ago we had tough class, and when we left, the boys, they went like this to us. I was like,
No.
oh, and they were like, oh my god, I can't believe the kids, right? But we just want them to smile, because we usually have them write, their feelings or what's going on, and some of their stories are heartbreaking. And if we can make one student smile, if we can make one student believe in himself and say, you know what, my life right now does not mean that's my future,
Yeah.
if we can just give them hope, because here where I live, is one of the poorest areas in Texas, right? So we have a lot of tough situations in our region.
Hmm.
And so it's basically about empowering kids. That's really, at the end of the day, that's what we do. So we do all kinds of activities. Um,
Is it bilingual?
yes, the majority of the work that we do when we get hired is for bilingual students. But then we also get hired to work with other students, like from other programs, like ACE programs, Gear Up
Mm,
programs, Monolingual. And so whatever the group is, then we work on whatever it is that the goals the district has for them. And then sometimes they say, we want you to just do it,
yeah.
whatever you think is best. And then we go and then we create
What
learning.
do you think? What do you think the kids are missing the most? What do they need the most?
The number one answer, because we always ask kids, what is something that you wish your teachers knew about you?
Hmm.
Okay. And I'm actually trying to write a little book on it because 99% of the kids will all respond. I wish my teacher knew that I am smart.
Mm.
That is the number
Mm.
one answer. I
Wow.
wish my teacher knew that I am smart. And then when we're talking about the social emotional part, the number one answer is I don't like myself. I'm ugly. That's like the number
Wow.
one on the social emotional. So it's really heartbreaking. I had a little boy write on one of the responses on what I wish my teacher knew about me. He wrote, I wish my teacher knew that my mother is dead.
Wow.
So every time my teacher tells me she's calling my mom and she doesn't answer, it's because she's dead. When I read that, I showed it to the
Wow.
teachers and they knew exactly who the kid was, right? But you see, that teacher has zero connection, or the connection with the counselors, or their parent just died. Like, my teacher has no idea that my mom is dead. So yeah, so we do a lot of, and so those responses from kids help us, right? When we know we're going to go into a school, we already know, especially if it's middle school, high school, that they don't like themselves, they don't like how they look. Some kids have said I'm too brown, I hate being Mexican, things like that. Again, because of the historical trauma, what has happened in their lives. And so it's just how to change that. And when we, even if one kid comes up to me and says, I'm so happy, like this is the best day of my life, that to us, we've done our job, because they're missing it. They're missing
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's tough. That's tough. I can't even imagine reading some of those responses and seeing how heartbreaking they are, and then trying to figure out how do I make this situation better. That seems like a real difficult thing, because I'm sure, like, we don't all have the answers. Like, you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, and to get that message, like that one where you told me, where I wish that my teacher knew that my mom, wasn't alive anymore, because she keeps saying that I'm gonna go call your mom, and it just reminds me that my mom is not alive anymore.
She can't answer
That's
the phone.
tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a tough one, and I don't even know what the answer is. My thing probably is, like, you just love, like, just loving, caring, and letting them know that you are loved and you are cared for, and there are people that love you, and that's a tough
And
one.
and even for me, even when I speak to kids, I never say your mom, your dad. I always say, hey, everybody, when you talk to your mom, your dad, your grandma, your cousin, your guardian, because
Name
some
them
kids
all.
don't have parents, and that's the worst situation to be in, to assume that everybody has a mom and a dad. Um, and so your grandparent, your tia, your cousin, or whatever.
Hmm.
But yeah, so those are tough moments for us. Sometimes we do work with kids that are homeless. And
Yeah, that's a
uh,
reality now. That's the
yeah,
reality now. Yeah, that's rough. And then you have parent workshops. What are those like?
those are, and we also have them bilingual, and we offer them for parents on just we do a lot of social emotional for parents, like how to support themselves,
Yeah.
how to take care of yourself as a parent, so that you can go out there and take care of your kid, your student, your child.
Hmm.
Also, how to support kids, how to communicate with teachers, how to even use internet, like, oh, how I'm going to find my
Yeah.
son's teacher. Because a lot of parents care, but they just don't know how. And it's very empowering. During COVID, I remember having a parent session for some district up north, and you could see the parent she was working making pizzas, and while she was watching, and she would come back, and it's just tools that maybe you and I take for granted, because, oh yeah, of course, this is a problem, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of, like, social capital things that parents have no idea exists. Oh, did you know that you could do this? Did you know that if your child is having trouble and they need a therapist, that the school now provides counseling and whatever? Or If you are undocumented and you want to go to, your kid wants to go to college, well, there is funds. You can do the TAFSA, just anything from how to take care of your child, how to take care of yourself. Um, because some people are like old generation like me, where God forbid you got caught taking a nap at home. It's like, oh. But you have to be good to yourself. You have to help yourself. And basically how to bridge teachers and parents, and
Yeah.
administrators. Like we're here to help you. We're not your enemy. We're just trying to help your child succeed and change a lot of those distances. So yeah, so that we do a lot of that as well.
You know, just listening to what you have to say, we assume that parents know. We assume that parents know, and then you go on the parent side, and maybe they're afraid to ask because they don't want to look like they don't know, because that makes them seem a certain way, like they don't know anything, and
And there was a to interrupt you real quick to share that is that there was a director. She was sharing with me just 3 weeks ago that there was a student that they kept having a meeting. They wanted a meeting with the parent. They wanted a meeting with the parent. The mom didn't show up 2 or 3 times, so they were like livid. We're not going to let you come into the classroom until your mom shows up, right? So finally, the lady shows up an hour and a half late to the
yeah.
meeting. So everybody in the meeting is upset. And the lady said, "I'm sorry. It said I was walking from, whatever street, and then it rained." I mean, and that changed everybody at the table, right? She's
Hmm.
like, "I don't have a car. I don't have access to a bus." They're like, "Ma'am, you walked from all the way, however many miles." "Yes, that's why I'm late." You see, sometimes
Yeah.
it's that. And we assume that everybody is like us. We assume everybody has a car, or you can get somebody to give you a ride, or everybody knows how to use the lift. No, everybody is different, right?
Yeah. And we
So
just got
yeah,
to give grace to our parents. We have to give grace to parents, and grace to everybody, the teachers, the kids, the
everybody,
administration, everybody.
teachers, yes.
Yeah, everybody deserves a little bit of grace, because we all are going through things. Life is tough, life is expensive, and we all deserve some sort of grace. I think that if we gave grace to everybody, just a little bit of grace, I think the places that we work at would be a lot better and just be better.
Would be better. And
Yeah,
grace to ourselves too.
grace to
That's,
ourselves. Yes, yeah. And then you do PDs with teachers as well, correct?
yes, those are my favorites.
Those are why are they your favorites?
Just because I love to change paradigms. Especially since I do a lot of work with bilingual ESL, and there's a lot of misconceptions and people argue we don't need it, whatever, or kids aren't smart. And so just changing those mindsets of, wow, I had no idea. And I also do here in Texas, the teachers have to be certified bilingual or ESL. And so we do uh, trainings for that to help them get certified, to be able to service our students. And just a lot of, basically, I love sessions where I can teach the way that I taught. There was a research study way before COVID, because I was doing a lot of research on technology, that says, this is before COVID, that the classrooms of today mirror the classrooms 100 years ago. The only difference is the building. Okay, because remember, back in the day, it was all paperwork, right?
Hmm.
So I tell teachers that's not how we learn sitting down. We have to, well, what activities can we do? Okay, we could do this activity, we could do that activity. And is that just for bilinguals? No, those
For everyone.
activities are for everybody. Do you want to be bored? I don't like to be bored, you know?
No.
And so neither do kids. So make things interesting, connected to life, connected to their culture. Um, yeah, so and my favorites, of course, are elementary teachers, because we can dress up and they don't look at us weird. But
Yeah.
I like middle school and high school too. At first they're like, what's going on? And then at the end, they're all happy.
Do you get pushback when you start to with the teachers? You get pushback from them?
Uh, no, I don't get put. I mean, I might see faces, like you could tell they're like, oh, I don't want to be here, whatever.
Mm.
But then at the end, I'll have my principals come up and say, that man over there that was asking questions and was sharing his experience, he is the toughest, meanest person we have here. They like round up everybody and are very negative. They're like, I cannot believe he was positive right now, right?
Yeah.
So if there is pushback, I don't see it. It did happen to me twice though, where people were like, "Why do we have to be ESL certified? It's illegal. I'm going to sue you and whatever." And all I told them on the two occasions was, "We all want what's best for kids, so we are united because you want what's best for kids, so do I."
Yeah.
And just hear me out. Like once you hear me out, then maybe you'll be able to understand. And one of them apologized at the end of the session, and he said, "Oh my God!" And this is when I was at the region. He said, "I'm going to buy you a gift. What can I buy you?" And I said, "How about a 6 pack of Pepsi? Because that's my
Yeah.
favorite." Yeah, he was very apologetic. But the pushback that I see, I can see it in the face. But then at the end, they'll come and tell me, "I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't want to be here." And I'm thinking to myself, I could tell, but
Do you
yes.
do those same surveys with the teachers? Like, what is the most difficult thing in the classroom that you're facing in 2024? Do you do any of that? Do you ask the teachers that question?
You know what? I after you sharing this with me, I will ask the question. But one thing that I have asked is, what are the differences? What is the difference that they see now, like prior to before COVID?
Before
And
COVID,
so
yeah.
one thing that they have shared with me is that now there's just a lot of fighting. There's a lot of meanness going on. People, the kids are not as nice as they used to be. They're very less tempered and more, they lack compassion. And
Hmm.
so they've always wondered, before COVID, we didn't have that happen as much. But I like your question to see what they're facing. But asking about 2020 was the difference between teaching before 2020 and now. Their answer has been there again, that kids are meaner, or their students, not all of them, right? That the students are less patient, might not want to share, and so we just wondered if something happened there during the COVID times, or just people in general.
I asked myself that same question because I get a lot of people and that we talk about that time, and I think about it and I'm like, okay, before COVID, you were a dean of students. Before that, you were a fifth grade teacher. Before that, you worked middle school. Every classroom that you got had students with difficult behavior. You always got the most difficult students. So that didn't change. In middle school, you got difficult students, and elementary school, you got this. So then you're dean, and all you deal with is with difficult behavior. Then COVID happens, and then you go back to being a dean, and now you're assistant principal, and all you deal with difficult behavior. So my whole career has been dealt with, dealing with students with difficult behavior. So even though COVID happened for me, nothing has changed because all I dealt with was with difficult behavior before that. And I'm dealing with is with difficult behavior. That's all I've dealt with. And I try to think, I'm like, okay, can I tell the difference between this difficult behavior before COVID, and is there more incidents? To me, it's all the same. Like all I've been dealing with is with difficult behavior. The only thing that's changed for me is like I've been able to articulate what works. A very simple principle, just this is what works, and I've been able to articulate it and pinpoint it like this. If you just do this, you'll be good. But for me, COVID is, I've always dealt with difficult behavior. So I can't really tell the difference between before and after. I don't know. So,
That's an interesting question to ask, that I'll start asking my teachers for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And then text me, email me something. I want to know the answer. Send me a message on
Yes.
TikTok.
Yes, I
Um,
don't have more sessions until June with big crowds, and that'll
uh,
be a question for sure.
and you're an author. You're an author. What's
Yes,
the
yes.
what's the name of the book?
So I have several books, but my first publication was The Death of My Mexican Name. It was published with Rethinking Bilingual Education. And then I published a bunch of books during COVID.
Oh,
And then I have a new one coming out, but I'm not an author, I'm a co author. um, I can't remember the title. It has to do with border violence. But
mhm.
one of my I call it little books because it was only like 25 pages. It was teaching during the time of COVID, teacher tools. And so that one received top 100 on Amazon, um, for the counseling section. I can't remember the name of it.
Wow.
But yeah, so I publish my own. So whenever I have a session, I have kind of like a book that goes with it. I love to write. That's where I find a lot of peace and joy in writing.
Yeah.
I love to write. If somebody sends me hey, you want to write? See if you get admitted into this book. I write something and I send it. You know.
Yeah. So the death of my Mexican name. That's an interesting title. What is that book about?
So that was me in fifth grade. And my Mexican name is Maria Edith Espinosa Yepes. And so I write about how my teacher calls me up to the desk and she's like, "You're not in Mexico anymore.
Ooh.
Pick one name or the other. What's it going to be, Maria or Edith?" And so I didn't want to be Maria because when I grew up, Maria was the name of the India Maria. Have you heard of the India Maria?
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So she was an iconic comedian character in Mexico. Everybody knows the India Maria. And the India Maria was portrayed as very ignorant. You know, she was ignorant. And I was like, well, I don't want people to call me Maria because I think of Maria, I think of La India Maria, right?
Yeah.
So then I said, okay, Edith. And she doesn't call me Edith, she calls me Edith.
Edith.
And
Yeah.
then, and so then Espinosa is my maiden name. And she said, and no Yepes, Espinosa. And so she's like, okay, so I'm going to call you Edith Espinosa. And I just, all my little classmates were looking at me. And so in my narrative, I wrote about how I didn't feel American. Like she was trying to make me be American. But that messed up my whole identity for a long time. I mean, when I joined the army, when I got out, um, I changed my name to Edith Espinosa. I took the Maria out, and now I
Yeah.
wish I could have it back. So I write the whole narrative. And the first time it was published, I think it was on Facebook back when it came out. Um, the publisher sent me an email. They're like, please respond. People are going crazy commenting on it. I had no idea. So that's why I'm ET, because if you say my name, it doesn't sound, I don't like how it sounds. I like Maria Edith. That's like my childhood name, right? So if somebody says Edith, it sounds like mean to me. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
So ET phone home.
Yeah.
And that, I guess I renamed myself, but I prefer ET than for someone to call me Edith.
Edith.
Because nobody
Edith.
can say Edith.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all this trauma, but yeah, that was one of my first publications.
Yeah. That's interesting. The
And
death
it's
of my
online.
Mexican
Like if
name.
somebody Googles the death of my Mexican name, it'll come out.
That's awesome. That's an awesome name. It's an awesome book. I kind of want to read your story now because that's I could see how that's the we talked earlier about trauma and like I said to myself, I share with you that my parents did not teach me Spanish. They could have, my mom could have, and it just didn't happen, right? And so you grow up and you don't know where you fit. You don't know where you fit. You do you fit with all the Mexican kids, or you don't speak Spanish, so you don't really fit, or you're not American for sure, so like where exactly do you fit? And you're just growing up and you just don't know where you fit. And that's a huge problem. Um and that's yeah, it's all because of that. You said was it
And that
trauma or
happens
the
because of historical trauma, right? So
historical trauma?
your parents didn't teach you English, not because they didn't value the language or the culture. It's because I guarantee you your parents went through trauma either because they spoke Spanish. Maybe some people as students, they would get hit, they would get paddled. There was like a no English, I mean, no Spanish
No
anywhere.
Spanish.
And
Yeah.
so parents wanted to protect their children, right? And they said, you know what? I don't want my children to have an accent, or I don't want my children to speak Spanish because I don't want them to be treated the way I was treated. And that is the number one reason that I know of that people didn't teach Spanish to their children or another foreign language. And so what I share with people now is that we don't live in those times anymore. So don't be afraid to speak it, or don't be afraid to learn it, or and it doesn't even have to be perfect. So the historical trauma goes so deep that I remember speaking to about 60 to 80 kids in an elementary school close to where I am right now. And they hired me for bilingual kids. So I knew all those kids were bilingual. And I asked them, to begin, who here is bilingual? Only two of them raised their hands. And then they went like this,
Wow.
and they looked around. So I knew what I was facing, right? And so then I pumped them up. We did the session. We ended the day, whatever. And when I finished the session, I asked them again, boys and girls, who here is bilingual? They all raised their hand super high. And so when the session was over, the principal came up to me and said, "Hey, Dr. E.T., did you just see what happened?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "It's almost like they needed to hear it from us, that it
Yeah.
was fine." And so that is very much embedded in our culture, that if you speak Spanish, you're poor, that if you speak Spanish, you're ignorant, or another foreign language, right? And so all these historical traumas have been embedded in our brain, in our psyche, in life. And so that's my goal, is to try to change that. When I go to districts, that's my goal. And then if you don't speak Spanish, I tell kids, or any other language, but in your house, does anybody speak another language? And then they'll say, yes, my grandma speaks Korean or Spanish. Okay, ask your grandma to teach you some words, just 10 words. And they're like, oh, okay, it's fine. Language is a civil right. And so that's really what I try to do. But it's because of the historical trauma. And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, people say, yeah. And then if you were to speak to your parents and ask them, that I bet you they have stories that you probably never heard of things that they
Probably.
went through because they spoke Spanish. And you're going to be like in shock, like, that happened to you? And I say, yeah.
Yeah.
And they didn't want that to happen to you.
Yeah. Hmm. So we're coming toward the end of the podcast right here, Dr. Et. And I always end my podcast with tips that you could give to future educators. And since you deal with bilingual, what what kind of tips can you give to teachers, educators who work with bilingual students?
Okay, so 3 tips. One tip is students bring knowledge with them. They have they have knowledge, okay, pre-existing knowledge. What they know in Spanish or Chinese or Mandarin or whatever, they know it in English. They just don't know how to say it, but the knowledge is there. Okay, if we move to another country tomorrow, we still know things. We still know how to add. We still know how to divide. We just don't know it in that language, right? And then number two, empower your students. Empower them with what they do know. It's like what we ask students all the time: what do you wish your teachers knew about you? They're like, I wish my teacher knew I was smart. And
Yeah.
they are smart. Some of them are going to turn into little translators at the age of 7. And then the last one, which is super important, is get to know your kids. Get to know your kids. Find out about them. In my doctoral research findings, some teachers created ways to get to know kids, but you would be surprised when you get to find out their story. It changes you, because some of the kids have lived lives that us as adults would not be able to handle. So here's a
Yeah.
little kid in your class trying to learn, and he has this huge life experience that we would not be able to handle. And so I think that helps us to make connections with kids. Um, as we're teaching them, make connections to content, to language, to culture, so that we could be united, and so that they know that we care. And
Yeah.
caring is a big one, right? So
That's
all of
right.
those have to do with caring. Yeah.
That's right. Well, Dr. Et, thank you so much for being on the podcast, for taking time out of your day to share your wisdom with everybody that listens to the podcast. Where can people find you before you leave? Where can people find you? Where can they get your
Dr.
book?
Dr. Et on the border. If you just go to Google and write down DRET on the border, Dr. Et on the border, or Dr. Et and Company, then you can find me. If and then you can message me, and I always give out my phone number when I go to conferences, and parents share their experiences with me. So I always answer my own emails. I never have anybody else answer my own emails and messages. But you can find me on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and they're all Dr. Et on the border except for LinkedIn. I think that one is Doctora Et or something. I can't remember.
Somebody had your name. Well,
Yes.
Dr. Et,
So
thank you so much. Again, thank you so much.
I appreciate you so much, and the work that you do for our students, and for all students, and to support teachers también. Muchas
Yeah.
gracias.